The final two speakers are Michael Lewis, Wireless Harlem, and Dharma Dailey, the Ethos Group. And that's it. I'm sorry, I didn't know that you wanted to speak.
Good morning. My name is Michael Lewis. I'm the founder of a nonprofit organization called Wireless Harlem. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. I'm here today to urge the City Council not to delay the FCC's introduction of new unlicensed wireless spectrum or TV white spaces. I wanted to just start by talking about Intel Corporation, Intel Corp Chairman Andy Grove laid out a new principle when he discussed a concept he called strategic inflection points. He observed this concept during his stewardship of Intel, and he said that these strategic inflection points represent moments in history when new developments in the marketplace represent an opportunity for fundamental change. One could argue that we are at such a crossroads today with TV white spaces, or more importantly, more and better wireless spectrum. The public benefit is very clear. For rural communities, Wi-Fi signals could cover greater distances and reach more households. And in larger cities like New York, Wi-Fi signals over white spaces could cover more people in densely populated area and using far fewer wireless radios than necessary today. At the beginning of this year, we started a program in partnership with the Children's Storefront in East Harlem called Tech Saturdays, where once a month we give refurbished computers to any family in Harlem that wants one. Since the beginning of this year, our volunteer group has given away nearly 500 computers to families. While today we have the computers, in fact, we are running out of space to store the PCs and eMacs we get from other schools. We also use license-free software to install word processing and educational programs, but the missing element for most families is still the broadband connection. This is primarily because the cost for families is out of reach. But our organization isn't only hearing from these families. We get calls from students, college students, small business owners, and more residents of Harlem email us and say they cannot get affordable, who can afford broadband access, but for whatever reasons have been stalled in their efforts to get connected using today's carriers. With the introduction of more and better widely available spectrum, more neighborhoods and small business owners will be able to get access, especially in spaces where there's difficulty in reaching customers, or when affordability is an issue, or for small business owners who have to spend resources in other areas. This development shouldn't be seen as occurring at the expense of current telcos and cable providers. Indeed, for many residents who cannot afford broadband connectivity, Wi-Fi over white spaces could be a viable first option from community-based organizations like ours and many others across New York. As more residents became familiar with download and upload speeds, and as their needs changed, they would have the option of moving up in price and speed. Over the past several months, we have tested commercial and off-the-shelf mesh networking equipment. We believe that it represents, mesh networking represents the realization of low-cost, easy-to-deploy broadband networks. During our tests, including several within 100 to 200 feet of large and small churches using wireless microphones, no interference issues were reported. The spectrum being freed up with TV white spaces will be key for the spread of broadband access to more of New York's neighborhoods and small businesses. I'll end by saying that today there is a great deal of positive public awareness being generated on radio and television commercials alerting residents that with the onset of DTV in February 2009, that many older televisions will not work. Our hope is that shortly after this shift takes place, we will be able to explain to consumers and small businesses that the abandoned white spaces also open the door for more wireless broadband options for New York's neighborhoods and small businesses. Thank you for...
Thank you. And Kathy at Children's Storefront loves you. She's the principal.
Thank you
Go
very
ahead.
much.
My name is Dharma Dailey. I am the Director of Research for the Ethos Group, a consulting company which focuses on the social impact of local broadband. In plain language, I do participatory action research, which means I get to go around the country and sleep on people's couches and see what kind of connectivity that they have, and try to work directly with community advocates, community media groups, media reform groups at the grassroots level to address the persistent communication gaps that exist in local communities. I don't define this work as digital divide work because it's not about technology, it's about solving people's communication problems. I'm going to skip through most of my testimony because I'm sure people want lunch. Briefly, there is an arc over the last 100 years that continuous and steady progress of technologies that allow for more intensive use of the airwaves. One example that I think is really exciting, I just learned about last week, which is not necessarily a wireless white space device, but an FCC engineer that I was speaking with last week on his desk is looking at retinal implants. Retinal implants are electronic devices that are so precise, they work exactly with the brain waves in your own brain at just the right power and just the right frequency to be able to give sight to the blind. And this is the kind of precision that is here and available to us, and we should be using that kind of precision to get more public airwaves available to more of the public. I've been an advocate for opening up the airwaves to the public for over 15 years, which means that I spend about a third of my time on the road with grassroots groups and about a third of my time sitting through proceedings like this. And a lot of the things that I heard today are not new. Maybe it's not Motorola or Shure, maybe it's the National Association of Broadcasters or some other group, but the tactic of couching business models and political agendas around technology is a persistent tactic that consistently we come across as we fight to open up the airwaves for public use. The National Association of Broadcasters would look like right fools if they had gone to the FCC and to Congress and said that tiny 3-watt stations that broadcast to a city block or a suburban neighborhood or a housing project like the one that I grew up in would fracture their market share, so we need to keep them off the air. Instead, they say tiny neighborhood radio stations will make airplanes fall out of the sky. I appreciate what the broadcast engineers today have said about the difference of RF or interference and the challenges that provides. My strongest recommendation to the council would be to go directly to the FCC engineers because they are the closest thing that we have in the public sphere to they're engineers who work on the public's behalf. And I would suggest to you that instead of bringing in manufacturers and so forth to discuss the different merits of their different technologies, pick up the phone and get some of those guys here or go down to the FCC and talk to them. There's a number of briefings that have come out in these proceedings that are meant for policymakers and meant for non-engineers that go over all of the different technologies that are being discussed. The one that I found the most helpful and useful for a non-engineer is the cognitive radio NPRM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which is what Commissioner Powell had got started, that gives an overview of all of these technologies. And the important thing to understand is that most of these technologies are not new technologies. What's innovated is not the technology itself, but the way that the technology is being applied. And what we as community advocates are asking for is we're saying, let's look at the deck of all of the different cool technologies that have been around, old and new, and let's shake those up to see how we can get more intensive use of the public airwaves for public uses like broadband. I disagree with a lot of the testimony that I heard earlier about how easy it is for mom and pop groups, whether they're civic, cultural, economic, or small government, to be able to negotiate the licensing system at the FCC. As somebody that has held hands with a number of community groups going through that process and found it to be extremely difficult. And so as we look forward at the different opportunities that these new technologies, we're looking at what we'd like to do is we'd like to push the FCC and push the licensing regime down into the streets where we're lowering the barriers to entry, making the technologies do more of the work of figuring out how to share the airwaves nicely. And I think that that's really possible. I'm also not a resident of New York City, and while I respect the fact that the Broadway industry is a very important industry for this country, this is a unique environment. The resolution, as it reads now, will be read in a very politicized way as something that is favoring the industries that exist, perhaps some of the most well-endowed cultural institutions and most well-known cultural institutions in the world over things like rural broadband, which is what we're fighting for. In most places in the U.S., there's what's called the point of presence, and that is a place where you have really good broadband connectivity coming into the community that is somewhere within a few miles of most of us. And in most places in the U.S., there's competition up to that point of presence with dozens or sometimes even over 100 different providers that are bringing connectivity into the community. But spiraling out from that point of presence in a lot of places, including some areas of where I live in Greene County, there's no broadband, even by the lousy definition of broadband that we have in this country. Cable and DSL are stopgap technologies that won't be considered broadband in a few years. And even so, they haven't gotten to every place in the country. So only 38% of rural Americans have broadband service right now. And part of that is not just that they can't afford it, which is an issue, but also that it's not available. Our area of Greene County typifies a lot of the problems that are in rural areas. Recently, I spoke with a broadband advisor to former Governor Spitzer, who told me that he had familiarity with my county. He used a single word to describe our communications infrastructure: hopeless. In context, I believe he was not only discussing the infrastructure, but also the lack of vision in the county. In preparing for the hearing, I spoke with a county economic advisor who told me it was invasive and inappropriate for the county to keep track of where communication services are available for county residents, which may explain why my neighbors, some of my neighbors, like 28% of rural Americans, according to Pew, which I brought a copy of the most recent Pew Internet research for you, can't get broadband at any price. And like most in my county, I have something that I'm paying for that's called broadband, but the service is not the quality that I expect. The cables are strung from telephone poles. We have regular weather-related outages that can last for hours. And while my neighbors are inconvenienced by not being able to get television service, for me, my livelihood depends on broadband. So it's a productivity issue for me.
Can you wrap up? I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's the end. I just want to urge the council to consider changing the language that you have in your current proposal to reflect the shifting expectations that the public now has to be able to use the airwaves in more intensive ways, and to focus on the public demand of pushing for a regime that makes it easier for artists and everyone else to accommodate public use.
Thank you both very much. I want to say three things. First of all, the administration wasn't here, but the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunication did submit testimony, and we will put it on the record. They do support the resolution. Second, we're going to try for the first time to get everybody's testimony up on the City Council website, and we also have a blog. So it will be up on there. And of course, it's all live, I think, in terms of different types of technology being used here today. And just finally, we will take everybody's words into consideration. You can see, for those of you who didn't know, that this is a very important topic. The only caveat I will say, and I've said it many times today, is we all live in different parts of the country, but those of us who live in New York City feel very strongly about our industry and feel very strongly about our cultural institutions. And so we want to accommodate them. As somebody with a long history of figuring out how we can have more access in the city of New York, the words of people who advocated for that we take very seriously, and I think, not to be too, not to leave anybody out, we want to make sure that there's no interference for television or anything else. So we have a broad agenda, but I appreciate the time and effort that people made to come here today, and we will keep in touch. We will put everything up on the web, and we will share with you when there's a vote and what we're doing. Thank you very much.